The Primeagen,
Good morning.
the green Primeagen. Nice background.
Thank you.
You see, I don't have a professional setup, so I do this from my living room. You know that my baby actually painted that painting over there.
Your
I
baby did?
mean, oh, he's no longer a baby. He's fine now, but he used to be 18 months. And then we moved to this new home. My wife got an interior designer to design the living room, and then she said we should put some abstract art in there. My wife feeling she quoted me a painting that was like $1,000, and then my wife felt all smart and say, you know what, I can get this from Wayfair for $400. So we're gonna save $600, and it's abstract art. I mean, just something that looks like it. And then I said, look, you have an 18-month-old baby. If you want abstract art, you give him paint and you let him run over the canvas, and that's exactly what he did, and that's the result. So just for the folks in the audience, then.
I don't know, other than the fact that that it does look like a little ill-planned when it comes to the
Yeah.
edging. Besides for that, I would say I had no idea. You could have been like,
It
"That's
is.
abstract art for $1,000," and I would have bought it. I would have
Uh,
purchased that abstract art.
well, it cost me $5, I think, because it was the canvas and then black ink and the yellow one, and there you go. The framing was the expensive part.
Oh, always.
Yeah. In fact, the framing was almost $400. So, but at that point, it became sentimental, right? We said, look, I just he did it, and we want to incentivize. Speaking of being proud of your accomplishments, before we start going to the actual subject, you now run a coffee company. So if you want to spend a couple of minutes to do like your shameless plug, I am drinking coffee right now. It is not terminal.shop because you guys did not ship to Canada when I was about
We
to
do
buy it.
now.
You do now. So I will buy it back. So tell us more about that, man.
Yeah, I'd be glad to tell you more about that. As you can see right here, if I hold on one second,
Let me
just
put
give
you
you let
full
me just
screen. I
give
think
you
it
let me
might.
just give you a nice view here.
Yeah.
So if you look right here, are we pretty close to
Yeah.
getting it? I think we're pretty close to getting it. Oh, you have me on full screen view, huh? All right,
Yeah.
nice. We do a little SSH. A little SSH terminal.shop. You get this beautiful shopping experience where you get to buy your coffee, all that stuff. We got a light roast, medium, dark, and of course decaf. Quite fantastic. Ships, I think, mostly everywhere. Q to quit, of course. All SSH. And I had a neighbor. Wait, hold on. Where are we? I'm right here. There we go. I had a neighbor that asked me if they could have my coffee. And I said, "Can you use SSH?" They said, "What's
There you go.
SSH?" And I
Then
said,
you can't.
"No."
Well, somebody on Twitter was saying that you probably did this so that non developers will not be able to order coffee because they don't know what SSH is. But the
That's the
reality
goal.
is that a lot of developers also don't know what SSH is, right?
Yeah,
But we do.
we're trimming the herd. All right, only a few people get to order the coffee. No, I mean the goal was is that this is purely designed for the nerd, and that's it. There is
There you go.
absolutely no other inspiration for it other than that.
Man, and you're probably a nerd, but and me too. And you're a streamer. You are on Twitter the whole time. Well, not the whole time, but a fair amount. And now have a CEO of a coffee company. But today in this podcast, I mean, this is of course the what inspired me to do this. We want to talk to the man behind all of this. The only thing I know about you as a person is that you were born in Montana. So take us there from being born in Montana to where you are today.
Just the whole thing. Just start and keep
Well,
going.
just uh, you don't need to tell us about prom and stuff like that. Like focus on what matters.
Well, I can tell you a fun fact. When
Let's
my
do it.
mom and my dad were younger, in their younger years of before kids and all that, my dad in North Dakota, where my mom grew up,
Hmm.
was out there being a landman, an oil man, and he went to get into the car one day, and his car was inside the garage, and these were the older cars in which you plugged in,
Yep.
and he had it plugged in and everything. And as he got in, reached in, grabbed, pulled himself up, the steering wheel snapped due to how cold it was, and just broke
Oh.
the steering wheel while being plugged in a garage. So he walked in to the kitchen where my lovely mother was, steering wheel in hand, and said, "I am leaving. You can come with me if you would like to." and that's how I made it to Montana. So
Without
then
a
I was
steering
obviously
wheel.
born. Yeah, and then obviously I
Yeah.
was born in Montana, Billings, Montana.
Okay.
I think I lived on a street called Princeton, if I'm not
Okay.
mistaken. With life's irony is that I would never be allowed at such a highfalutin society, and so
Yeah.
therefore I was born in it, but never
Hmm.
allowed in it. I don't know how that works out, but that was fantastic. Very, very happy about that. And so then for the next, I spent up till 18 in Billings. Started going to Bozeman pretty frequently when I was 14,
Hmm.
and then moved to Bozeman when I was 18, and then stayed there until I was 27. So that's like kind of like
Yeah.
the general archetype of life, living, and all of that.
In that story, you don't give us the feeling that you came from money.
No, I was dirt poor.
Yeah.
We are so
Okay.
poor that I may or may not have received a Christmas present that was already a toy I owned.
Okay. Do
Yeah,
you remember what that was?
a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Oh, that's cool. That's
May or
cool,
may
man.
not have been a
Yeah.
Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Or a generic dinosaur, right?
Generic dinosaur that's like it could have been an Allosaurus. If we're real here, it might have been more
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Allosaurus-y shape, but I wouldn't have known back then.
Yeah, awesome. And were you doing software back then already, or is this something that came later?
Um, I did. My dad did have a computer. He actually started a
Hmm.
computer company, and his whole thing was actually selling, being able to do long distance phone calls and being able to buy
Hmm.
in bulk and have that for much cheaper. Which there's a huge kind of like serendipity to that whole thing. That he started that company. It was too early because remember like 1010 220, or the other one like dial
Hmm.
down the middle, and you could actually buy long distance in bulk for cheaper. But that came like 8 years later.
I don't really, because like I was not born in North America, so the systems are completely different. So I have
Okay,
no
so
idea.
I don't
I
know what
kind
happened.
of kind I kind of relate. I kind of relate because everywhere I guess got similar things,
Yeah,
but I wouldn't know the
pain in the ass
nomenclature.
calling. Everyone got ripped off
Yeah.
calling during. You still get ripped off calling if you're in the right
Hmm.
area, right? If you travel and you try to call, then they try to rip you off still. But
Yeah.
somehow you calling outside of the United States is vastly more expensive than inside the United States. I kind of call BS on that one. It just kind of sounds like you made up a problem and then they're charging people.
Hmm.
Uh, but nonetheless, that happened all the time for long distance calls. And at one point, it probably was harder to do that technology. But my dad's idea was to do that. And so when he was young, um, I was probably 5 years old at this point, 6 years old, right in that area. He actually had a Windows 3.1 machine that when you booted it, it would actually go to like DOS, and then you type in Win, and it would launch Windows, and I could play Mahjong Tiles or Free Ski. I installed the Doom via 5 floppy disks, bought Thy Flesh Consumed edition.
Those were the days, man. Those were the days.
Those were good days. They were very, very
Those were
good
good
days.
days.
And I enjoyed it. I really had a great time doing all of that. I could not quite understand what I was doing, but hey, I could put floppy disks
Hmm.
in. I could figure things out. I could play Mario Teaches Typing. My sister, who graduated college before me, tied her shoes before me, and learned how to type before me, was a year and 4 months younger than me. She was the
Hmm.
inspiration for the reason why I'm fast at typing.
Awesome. Now, I was a bit older than that when I got my first computer. I think I was 10 or 11, but I played a bunch of games as well. Some of them I'm proud of. Some of them, some of them are not. But not stuff that I would like to see my kid playing. But there I was, and
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah, so
yeah,
then I played a game called Grail, Graal. I'm not sure if it's Grawl or Grail.
growl.
I think the guy even who created it, I think his name might be Lord Talks on Twitch. I know there is whoever created it and plays and streams on Twitch. And he's the reason
Hmm.
why I ever started trying to program anything ever, because he had this little he had a level editor and it was like Zelda. And I loved making like levels. I used to play Warcraft 2 and make a bunch of levels and do a lot of that. So then we could like battle each other or have AI and all that kind of stuff. And when I saw that, I started doing that. I started playing with the Grail offline editor.
Hmm.
And when you double click on an NPC, it would actually show some code. And I was just like, what the heck is this stuff? And so I just started figuring out what it meant and was able to like create some decently complex in game actions without actually knowing what programming is, let alone what anything meant. But I figured out what a while loop does, conditions, all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. I mean, it's not hard. I was in 5th grade
No,
when
it
that
isn't.
happened. Basic
The
programming
first thing
is
I've done, yeah, the first thing was I done was simpler than that. Despite the fact that I was actually older, I figured in some games you could go and edit the files and change the text that some
oh,
characters
yeah.
would say, right? Because things are simpler, and it was just a text file, and you would go and they would say one thing instead of the other. Just to,
Yep. Classic. I did the same thing.
yeah.
But there's an online game called Slayer. slayeronline.net, I think was the name of it. It was like a leveling
Mm-hmm.
RPG, real-time RPG game. And if you renamed the maps and traded them out, even though online you would appear in the correct map on your screen, you'd be in a different map and you could actually
Mm-hmm.
walk onto the water. And people were just like, how are you doing that? It's because everything was done
And
locally
yeah,
as opposed to on
yeah,
the server. So it's like, it's that simple. It was good days back then.
yeah, totally. And look, you are 18 at this point. When you were raised by your family, mom and dad, were they a religious family as well, or just something that wasn't present in your life?
I'd say there was a little bit of it before my dad died. My dad died when I was
Hmm.
7. Before that, we would go to church. I have some various memories of it that exists. And then my dad died, and then just never went back to church.
Hmm.
So that's about like my experience growing up.
Yeah. But was it a logistical thing in the sense that look, my
Logistical thing.
daddy's yeah, or not like we don't believe this anymore because
No, my mom just like was she was working about somewhere
yeah,
between 10 to 12 hours of the day. She was out of the house doing stuff, and then she'd come back and do laundry and make us dinner and all that kind of stuff. So it was just more of a,
that's brutal.
it was just impossible. In fact, she always claimed that that she got her God gave her her first vacation when 6 years into that she fell down the stairs and broke her back.
Well, talk about silver lining,
Yeah,
eh?
really, there was only silver lining in that one because that was crazy. And so for actually funny story, I used to watch. But actually, really funny story. I haven't shown anybody this one, but I got to meet Adam Savage a couple weeks
Hmm.
ago. And when after my mom broke her back, I used to give her back rubs just because she'd be in a lot of pain. And we'd watch TV, and I'd get to choose what to watch. If I was the back rubber, I would get the choice to choose what to watch, and we'd watch MythBusters. And so Adam Savage unironically played a large role in my childhood, busting myths, and I was trying to fix my mom's back.
Awesome. Look, man, one of the things that, in fact, let me tell you this: I appreciate so much how open you are with some of the issues you've had in the past. It is an inspiration for me specifically because I'm not. In fact, I think if it wasn't it's not an exaggeration to say that if it wasn't for how open you are, probably I wouldn't be doing this podcast because a lot of things in my life I want to keep it very private. And like you are, some things I think they're always the things that we keep private. But I think you were an inspiration to me, like just how open you are with some things. And one of the things you were very open about is the issue that you had with methamphetamine. So when did that start, and why
Oh, that
why
started right
did
after
you get it? Yeah,
high school.
yeah, yeah.
And so when I was in high school, I was fairly ruthlessly bullied and all of that.
Is that
And
right?
yeah, I had a lot of emotional issues when I was a younger fella. Um, but I always was, I just tend to be, I don't know. I was kind of a weird guy. Maybe, could call it, I was somewhere on the spectrum, whatever it was. It didn't really matter. I just couldn't figure things out. And at the end of high school, I tried to commit suicide. And then when I kind of realized all the wrong things and in the hospital and all that kind of stuff, I kind of made this agreement with myself. I'm just not going to care again. And so from there on out, I just didn't care. And so that's when I started smoking and then doing
Mm-hmm.
mushrooms and LSD and methamphetamines and really crack. I, smoked a little freebase cocaine and all that kind of stuff. Whatever I could to do something. And
Mm-hmm.
like that was my goal, was just to do anything. And so that started when I was 18. Obviously, before I was 18, I tried to get away with a little bit of drinking. I didn't really smoke much for pot. I always make this joke that it makes me feel like my wiener's hanging out. Like whenever I get high, I feel like
Mm-hmm.
so self-conscious. Like things I just feel so I can't like think clearly. So I'm always just like, dang, is my wiener out? Like, I feel so
Yeah.
I feel like I can't hold a conversation. And so it's just like that's not something I wanted to do. I just
Man, I did
never.
not. I did not know. I did not know that you were bullied like that. And for the record, I mean, I'm trying to use the opportunity to sprinkle a little bit of my story as well whenever I can. But I meet you. I had my first friend. I'm still in touch with him to this days. But my first friend I made at age 13. So for my 13 first years of my life, I had no friends. And in fact, I had the opposite of friends because loneliness in itself is already a problem.
Yeah.
Like people just, but for me, and I guess for you, the similar thing, it was even worse because it's not only like you don't have people that want you around. They actually kind of want you around so you can be like the butt of the joke or the
Yeah.
comic relief or whatever, or in some senses even physical. And but I understand you. Like I got a pretty fucked up, just youth in that sense. But thankfully, I never did drugs. Alcohol a bunch and the stuff like that. But I wouldn't even be able to articulate why. But I
Yeah.
had a phase in like that as well. I'm just saying, you know what, fuck this shit, and pardon my French, and I'll just go do wild stuff. And sometimes I look back and think, look, I think my life could have been different, and if I was in a different path, but I wasn't. But I did not do drugs, which I miracle because I could see myself doing it the same way as you did. Uh, 18, man, that's early.
Yeah. Yeah. Dumb decisions, when you
Hmm.
don't have, when you're young, you're not necessarily the best at making great long-term decisions.
Yeah,
So just wasn't good at it. That's okay.
must it must have had consequences, because
Yeah.
that's the problem with bad decisions. It's just
That's hence the reason why I did all those other things. By the way, every now and then there will be a moth that's flying by. The moth, and I can see it in the camera fly through here. So if someone
I
sees
saw
something
it. Yeah,
fly by,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, it's
yeah.
a moth. I don't have a choice over what's happening right now. I don't know what's going on, but whatever, right?
Make it a feature, not a bug. There you go. Just
It's literally a bug,
yeah. Good
unironically.
win. Yeah.
But yeah, so there you go. Yeah, that's like the general archetype. See, there it goes again. There's the
So
general archetype. I know I
I th-
can't
I
capture
thought it
it. It's
was
so
I thought it
fast.
was her cursor. I thought it was her cursor. You're just like
No, no, it's
because it
big and it's
presents us.
fast, and I don't know where it's at right now.
We'll live with the moth, man. I think
Okay, live with the
and
moth.
and again, you were at the time. It's safe to say that you were religious, but as a not much. Is that a safe assumption or
Yeah, I would probably say it's a little bit more appropriate to say I wasn't at all.
I don't know?
I think
But
to say I
did
was
you
would be a bit of a bit of a stretch.
would you have called yourself an atheist back then, or just a don't care kind of person, like
Don't
a
care. Don't
agnostic,
care.
don't
Not
care?
not not
Yeah,
agnostic, just don't care. Nihilist
just
maybe
a
would be a
yeah
better
nihilist. Yeah.
accidental paganist maybe would be probably a better unintentional
Why pagan?
paganism.
Why is that? Just
Just because I mean, the only part of life was to pursue and have pleasure, and I had no
mm-hmm,
real connection other than like light connections to things. And community
mm-hmm.
obviously was very important. Having friends, I wanted friends and all that, but I had nothing else other than the celebration of man.
Yeah. Where did you make your first friends? Because again, if you come from a bullying background, if you were anything like me, the first thing you need to do is leave that environment and go seek a different environment, right? Where you can start fresh. Because once you get into the cycle, it's pretty hard to get out, right?
In high school, I did have a couple friends.
Mm-hmm.
That was nice to have. In college, I made friends really, really easy. On 'em. I
Yeah.
just was just great at it. It could have just been the
And
momentum from high school that just never allowed anything else. But once I changed from high school to college, then it was the easiest thing ever.
yeah. And then did you go to college to do comp sci as well? Or
Yeah, I did. I went to college to do comp sci. So my
awesome.
time in college was a vastly different thing. Made a lot of friends, all that. So it's just a
And
different world.
and yeah, look, and we were chatting the other day when we met in person for the Brazil Mention event, which was a tremendous success, by the way. In which there you go. Thursday is always for those who follow the podcast that don't really know too much about us professionally. Like I am the CEO of Thurso, and just did this event for 500 people in Brazil with the Primeagen. Obviously, you got a lot of love from there, and we were
It was cool.
chatting. This was super cool, man. And we were chatting a little bit about about religion, and obviously today you see this very differently. Like, so what do you believe today, uh, as specifically as you can? Because Christian sometimes is just not specific enough. You believe in the moth. It's changing
The
now.
moth will not leave me
That's
alone.
fine. Yeah.
You could probably just put me under the generic Christian category,
Hmm.
if you will.
Hmm.
Just like fairly historically accurate
Hmm.
Jesus style would probably be the best way. Um, yeah, I'm not sure how to
Why?
sum it up other than that because there's so much
Yeah.
nomenclature and all that. Just like you're saying,
Hmm.
like I don't like Oh my gosh, the thing almost hit me in the face. Like, the thing I'm not oh, man. The thing I don't
I
like
have a zapper. I have a zapper. So
I know I need to
sometimes
get a
it's actually
zapper.
fun. Yeah.
I know, but then I get distracted and I'm just zapping all day.
Yeah.
But I'm not into all of the Lutheran stuff. Like, I'm not sure if I believe in the literal uh whatever they call the trans blah 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 of blood and body and all that kind of stuff
Hmm.
in communion and all that. Like, as far as specific goes, there's like a cajillion specifics that I just don't. I guess I don't really think much about
Hmm.
because I just don't find them that useful. I guess, if you will, they don't have really any meaning
Yeah.
in my life. I'm not sure if they really have that much meaning for a lot of people.
No, it certainly like but how did that come to be? So if you are this nihilist person, and then you know what out of a sudden, a couple of years later, you're completely different. What changed?
Oh, yeah, that's simple.
Yeah.
So I was doing a lot of drugs, all that kind of stuff. I was really
Yeah.
into that whole scene, and I just found myself like when you first start doing that, you at least have some new aspect to your life, right? All things that are
Hmm.
new tend to glitter a little bit more than the things that are old. And so there's like a lot of it's very entertaining or exciting, if you will. And so I'm like, oh, this is really, really great. And then as time went on, it just got worse and worse and worse. It just wasn't really fulfilling in any sort of way. And then on top of that, there also was I saw porn for the first time when I was 4 years old. And so I always just
Four,
yeah, four. And so I had a lot
dude.
of a lot
That's
of
messed
problems
up.
with that. Yeah, yeah, I had a lot of
Yeah.
problems with that, and, at some point, one evening in my life, I just remember having this really, really intense moment.
Hmm.
Like, the feeling of someone staring at you? Have you ever
Yeah.
that classic trope of, like, "Oh, it's a ghost in the house." It was
Hmm.
like that, but, like, 100x, and, like, I just knew for a fact, and then it was just kinda like I was given a choice in that moment was, like, "What do you want?" And what I really wanted, me being the ultimate heathenist, what I really wanted was to be happy. And
Hmm.
so I chose in that moment to go, okay, I guess I'm following God now. I didn't really know what that meant or anything. And you know
Okay.
how people always talk about these moments where they become a Christian or they change their life around. It's like this magical moment and everything changes and addictions drop and everything's great. Well, nothing at all changed for me, like at all, like nothing,
Okay.
nothing at all. And the next morning, I wake up, everything's still the same. Still have the same problem with porn, still want to use drugs, still have all the same friends, still feeling horrible. And I'm just like, "Ugh, that was like a really weird experience."
Hmm.
Okay. And so I kind of just shrugged it off like, maybe, I was just probably stupid, is all that was. I was just being ridiculous.
Yeah.
So then I shrug it all off and I do my lunch and all that. And then at some point I look at porn and all that. And then all this, and the actions that go along with looking at porn. And then right after that, I felt this horrifying guilt. I've never felt guilt in my lifetime. And all of a sudden, like that's what I get. That was what changed in me. And so there's just out of nowhere, it's just like, and then when I'd smoke pot, I'd get like deep into this, like, what am I doing with my life? It's like all of a sudden I felt like I had more of a reason to be here than just that. And like these other
Hmm.
things were just like so weak, and they're just not how I was meant to live. And I just couldn't shake that feeling. And I had just like I was just not ready for that. And so then that was just like such a driving force for me for the next 4 years, while I struggled with various versions of an addiction from smoking cigarettes,
Yeah.
pornography, drugs, all that. It took a long time before things shook out and were normal again.
When was that? When was that? Because you said this took 4 years. So when did that start? When did you have
18
this
to 22
experience?
is kind of like when I think I was 19. I think I was
Okay.
19 to 23, right around somewhere right in there. It was just a big struggle bus in those years for me. And so that's kind of, but I did
Yeah.
gain a skill. I did gain a very unique skill in that also. And so people often talk about this idea of natural gifting. And for those that aren't
Hmm.
in the quote unquote Christian world, the spiritual gifting. And so for me, I had a very natural gifting of like being able to hear something, remember it, being able to do kind of complex like logic problems have always been something I'm very, very good at. I've never
Hmm.
felt bad at all about that. I think that's why I just naturally gravitated right towards programming because thinking from A to B just feels exceptionally natural for me. It just is just very, very normal kind of experience. And so I've always suffered from being a bit too logical. Uh,
Hmm.
and I've always kind of had these problems where I get in fights because I'm just like, that doesn't make any sense, you know. And then I've learned to chill that out over the years and
Yeah.
not make these logical arguments. And so, being such a having such that problem, but I also I just never studied. I never did anything. And then right after that moment, the other kind of flip to the coin was not only did I kind of have guilt for the first time in my life, or shame, I'm not really sure which one it was. B, I had the ability just to start studying.
Okay.
And all of a sudden I could just sit down and I could just study. And at first it was like for 2 hours, which was like immensely more than I've ever been able to. And by the
Hmm.
time I was getting towards being done with college, I could sit down for 36 straight hours. I did multiple times where I just would just nonstop through the night, everything. It's just like I felt so driven to do things and to accomplish things that it was just a much
Is
different
this
experience.
something? Is this something that you prayed for like, hey, I would like to do
No,
this for my life, or is this something that just happened to you and
oh,
you were not
both at
able
the
to
same
move on?
time. Yeah,
Yeah.
both the shame and the drive happened at the exact same time
Hmm.
in a single evening in a moment. So, like, that's why I said nothing happened, but also everything happened. Like,
Everything happened. Yeah.
there was no quote unquote big awakening. There was not the sky did not part. Nothing happened other than it just was like my heart raced really far forward, but my
Hmm.
head was still in the same place. And so then it's just like my whole life and everything looked a certain way, but how I felt like was completely disjointed. I was the biggest hypocrite in the universe at that point.
Well, one of them, because
I don't
we
know.
have strong contenders, man.
The problem is that I don't know
Yeah.
the strong contenders and what they think.
Yeah.
I knew what I thought. And so I
Hmm.
personally was the biggest hypocrite I've ever met in the universe.
You told me once that the problem that you had with porn was even bigger than the problem that you had with drugs, and this resonated. And I told you something. I'm happy to share with the public, but I told you something in person about that. But like I think that people don't realize how debilitating porn can be, and it
Mhm.
wasn't for me but like it was for you.
Yeah.
And it's this thing that I am radically anti-porn today, and I was not. And I think I always view this as this. What harm? It causes no harm. It's just something that you do on your own. And
Yeah.
like, and then there are those arguments that people say, yeah, but the people that are producing that for you, like it causes them harm. But then you rationalized it by saying, yeah, but sure, some are like that, but then you just don't watch those, which I doubt you can tell the difference. But
And then you also
but
have like,
also
well,
like
they're choosing to do it. They're getting paid. You can rationalize
yeah,
all those ones.
exactly,
I've
yeah,
heard all
yeah.
those.
Yeah, but it can be debilitating to you as a person, right? So how is that for you? Because you seem to say that this is something that you struggle to get rid of, but you
Yeah,
wanted
it
to
was the
get rid of.
hardest by far.
Yeah.
The hardest one, smoking being the next hardest.
Hmm.
That was really, really hard addiction because it's so much more societally acceptable, right? I found
Yeah,
that the further you had to stray from society, the easier it is to break the addiction.
you're right.
Uh,
You're right.
just proportionally speaking, because it's really easy. And so, yeah, I found porn to be magnitudes harder than anything else. Completely different playing field. Very, very difficult. And
Yeah, I struggle a lot with addiction, and I think one of the reasons it's so hard for me, and one of them I was actually able to overcome. I think through my belief, my newfound belief in the Lord, I was able to overcome. But many others I was not, and I think that the reason for that is that my vices were always socially acceptable.
yeah,
I never got addicted. Like for example, drinking. I can drink, and I don't drink too much these days, but it's mostly. I mean, I have nothing for it or against it. I just feel
yeah.
like I'm getting old, so I sleep like I sleep terribly when I drink, so I tend
Wake
not
up
to
feeling
drink. Right? Yeah.
crappy. Well,
But I never. The reason I do drink is that I can drink, and if I decide I'm not going to drink, like I can say no. So that's not an addiction. It's not an addiction, right? I can say no, and I've said no many times, and I But all my other addictions are socially acceptable. Are things that most people would not even consider addiction, like working, uh, some video games and stuff like that. So you're right, like stuff that is socially acceptable. Some of them even celebrated as virtues, which after some point they're not. It's harder to break. Right?
yeah. No, I mean, but they exist in all different formats. You can see people that are, they vicariously live through their kids. Uh, no
Mm-hmm.
one, no one's upset about you're kind of upset, but it's not like hugely shameful. The parents that are way too into, say, soccer and drive their kids to be great at soccer,
Hmm.
or all of those things, academics and all that. Right, you go to the Silicon Valley and every kid that's 6 years old is doing multiplication because that's, like,
Hmm.
what you do. You gotta be successful. If you're not doing math by the time you're 4, you're not a successful person, and all these like, and it's very societally expected, but really it's, like, it's super unhealthy behavior. It's this, like, addiction to success that
Hmm.
we allow because it doesn't, at least it doesn't look bad on the outside,
Hmm.
even though you meet so
But
many kids that are absolutely crushed on the inside. But, especially the kids that maybe they're not gifted at being good at school when they're young. I
hmm.
wasn't gifted at that. I was horrible at it. That doesn't mean I wasn't smart or anything, but if I was in that environment, I'm sure I would have been emotionally crushed. I may never have been able to do
Hmm.
anything because I'd have been too crushed by the expectations and the missing of the expectations.
In which way specifically you think porn was debilitating to you?
Uh, I just couldn't say I could not exercise liberty or willpower in
Hmm.
it, in the sense that it was just such a driving force in my life. And
Yeah.
so it's just like, I mean, that's it. And the thing is that um I think it's really, like, as I got older and as I thought about it more and all those things, the reality is that when you are consuming porn or anything, you're objectifying the individual, right? Which
Hmm.
means that I'm specifically treating somebody like a means to my ends. And that is a really horrible thing to do. Like, people should not be considered a means to an end. And so I
Yeah.
really hated that aspect of it, that somebody else's whole existence was only for one specific thing for me. And so I didn't want to be that. Like, I didn't want, I had to have some sort of reason. Um, I have to have some sort of ground I had to stand on. And unfortunately, my ground I stood on, I did not live up to. And so I just really disliked it. And
Hmm.
and second, I wanted a wife at some point and kids. And I had a strong, after that blessed evening of getting a conscious, uh, I I looked at porn as, in some sense, cheating on my wife.
Hmm.
And so even though I didn't have a girlfriend at the time, I still felt horrible because it was like I was betraying somebody else. Because if I'm gonna get a wife and all that, and which is this is how I've lived up to this point. I haven't looked at porn, I think, in 15 years. I have no idea how long. It's been a long time. Um, but, like, if I'm gonna have a wife, I want her to be the sole and only affection in my life, like the only person that I look at
Hmm.
that way. And I want her to be the driving force because I want her to feel completely and absolutely, like, safe and protected around me. And so that's kind of the goal of mine, which is to try to love her to the maximum I can love her.
That's great, man. And I think one thing that people don't realize, and I don't think maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but one thing that I realized about porn eventually is that today, if you look around, there is this ethos in society to say that like whatever you feel is just natural, and you should just, if you're feeling it, you're justified to do it because you don't control it. It's just a feeling that is born
Yeah.
inside you. And the problem with porn is that you know it kind of proves that this isn't really true, that your desires are not just natural that emerges within you and you have no control. The more you look into porn, the weirder your desires get.
Yeah. There's
And
definitely a
that's just,
magnification
yeah.
process through that.
Yeah, and lots of those things that sometimes people think, hey, this is just, just something that you're feeling. Like you probably would not be feeling that if it were not for the fact that you were looking into other people doing it, and like it's mimetic desire if you want to get technical and quote Rene Girard. But so I do not think it's true that we are slaves to our emotions, that they just come to us and then you have no control over. When they come to you, it might be true that you have no control over, but there are things that you can do to change the things you feel, and one of them is just don't look at those things, right? Just stay away from it. And I wasn't addicted to porn. I don't think I had an addiction. And as I said, I know what addiction looks like because I was and still am addicted to some things. And you hit the nail in the head. It's just you have the sense that you have no liberty, that you're not in control, that you cannot say no.
Yeah.
To porn, I could say no to. Is just that I don't, at the time, the funny thing is that I had this impression that I think a lot of people would share. And this is why I think it's important for us to talk about it, because maybe a lot of people in the audience feel or think what I used to think is that, look, it is impossible for you to live your life without this. I may have control at this one moment. I'm not going to do it now. I'm going to do it later. But in overall, at some point you got to do it, right? Just in fact, I found it ridiculous, like that in the Catholic Church, which I am now a member of. Masturbation is something you're supposed to confess. So I mean, you don't do it. It's on par to some extent with killing someone. Not on par. Both of them you're supposed to go and confess. And I found like that impossible, because so that then anybody's going to be confessing this every week, because this is something natural that everybody does every week. And I think inspired by your story, I decided just, hey, I'm not going to do this anymore, because this is terrible. This is this is objectifying people. It doesn't help. It only harms. And why would I keep doing it? And then I completely stopped. And it's been not 15 years, because I had this realization much sooner. But it's entirely possible for you not to do it, and you don't lose anything. And in fact, you only gain things, because again, your desires are more natural. Your understanding of the human person are more grounded in what they are spiritually and physically to some extent. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm on that team, generally speaking.
Yeah.
And there's like a whole
And
host of like studying and things coming out saying actually it is probably super addictive. Yeah, it probably isn't good for you. Yeah, like they had like decision making and men and pornographic images, and showed that like just even flashing a pornographic image in front of a man like makes his decision making statistically less reliable for 30 minutes. And there's all these like extra things that were being layered on top of all
mhm.
of it. And I don't know how true or false. I'm always a pretty light on the belief of any study, just due to the immaculate amount of, oh, actually they're completely wrong, that
Yeah.
comes out of it. But I love having confirmation bias where I'm like, yeah, it's probably right. Yeah, it's probably right because I already felt
That's
like that.
awesome. No, you see, so you're definitely not a hypocrite anymore if you admit that. We all have a little bit of confirmation
Oh, I'm
bias. It's not
super
just,
hypocrite.
yeah, yeah,
Oh, easy peasy,
yeah.
pumpkin seedsy.
Awesome.
I am under
And
no delusion of grandeur.
which it was it Chesterton that said that there is nothing more extraordinary than an ordinary man, an ordinary wife, and ordinary kids. So this idea that you have nothing, nothing big about you, nothing of grandeur. I would dispute that, but I appreciate the fact that you think like that. But look, you got rid of this, and you managed to overcome it. You told me once, and like God played the role
Hmm.
in you getting rid of that. How was that?
Can you say that question differently?
You told me once that you would not have been able to stop your addiction to porn without the Lord's help.
Yeah, it was that driving. It was just
That
that
consciousness,
driving
that's a,
shame thing that happened.
yeah.
You know, that's really. I mean, that's the turning point of my life was that. So it's not very magical, not very sexy. Doesn't make a really great story. It's pretty one dimensional.
Yeah, no,
It's
it's
just like
great.
one day I never felt anything, and I loved acid and sleeping around and trying to do whatever I can, and then the next day all of a sudden I just felt bad. Never felt
Hmm.
bad in my life. I'm still like a little upset that I had to just feel super bad. Like that what it was. Like why could it just
Hmm.
been like everything's just gone? That
Easier.
would have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what the heck was that all about. That's just I
Hmm.
did not appreciate that.
Awesome. Uh, use that you just told us all that you are a super logical person, which to everybody that watches your stream, of course, should be more than obvious. But one of the reasons that I wanted to start this podcast is that when I was on the other side, so to speak. So and for clarity, like I was an atheist, like really like Richard Dawkins level. I don't believe in
Yeah,
anything, and that I'm certain that there's no God. How can I be certain? Because I'm 15. How would I not be certain, right? And
but you
I
were an
used to
atheist
have a
all the way till you're like 38, right?
pretty much, but a lot of that, just that's a bigger story. But I started age 14, 14 to 15, and I know the moment. I remember the moment in which I just said, "Hey, I don't believe in any of this anymore." Then I had a very interesting experience and a set of experiences that led me to question the materialism view of the world. But then I didn't go back to religion. I embarked on like a new age adventure.
Yeah.
so to speak. I think it was so many things, for so many reasons that I think that's the best way to describe it. And that lasted until pretty much 30, 36, 37. So quite recently. I'm 41 now. So, but I was on the other camp, and I had a very low impression. Again, very much on the Richard Dawkins kind of camp. I mean, how can anybody with two neuron cells believe any of that crap?
Yeah.
And you're a logical person, and you believe all of that crap. Why is that? Why don't you clearly don't see a contradiction here?
No, I don't. I
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's much of a contradiction. I think it's I kind of think of the world in kind of, I guess, groups. Like the first thing I think of
Mm-hmm.
is just about this, like a desire that we all have for justice. And I know
Mm-hmm.
people will try to, they'll try to give you the all shallows is clear, like, oh, well, we're social animals. We grew up in a social circle. It's like, but that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't, hold on, like time out. TO, throw the TO here. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, stop. Like, it's the same thing. You'll hear someone say, "We know less about our ocean than we know about space," and it's just like, "Yo, bro,
Mm-hmm.
there's oceans on other planets." Like, what the hell are you actually saying right now? Like, that's the stupidest
Yeah.
thing I've ever heard my entire lifetime. We know much more about the ocean than we do about space, and so this whole idea that there exists this desire for us all to see like justice and good, it's just not represented in any life experience, right? Like everything you
Mm-hmm.
do grinds against that. Every single
Mm-hmm.
last feeling you have grinds against that. And then all of a sudden you like hit these weird walls where you're just like, no, I want to change this. I actually want to do something that's like anti against my feelings and do something different. Like that's a very bizarre experience. It's anti-animal, right? You're not listening
Mm-hmm.
to yourself. You're listening to something that's going against everything that you feel in all points. And so that's a very unique or bizarre thing that, I obviously started observing this, but besides for all like the technical arguments about all these things and why you should, and I do think it's equally as stupid to say, if you say there absolutely is no God, it's equally as stupid as saying there absolutely is a God in some sense, like on a purely logical level, because
Mm-hmm.
you're making statements about the universe that are kind of funny.
Yes.
There's easy ways to defeat stuff. Like I never believed in relativism. I always thought that was just like the most absurd statement of all time, which is there is no truth, which is like an exceptionally absolute statement.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is that you can't even say there's multiple truths. That doesn't work logically speaking. You can really only say there is one truth. Like that's the only thing you can say logically speaking, and that's the only it's the unfortunate logical conundrum of the universe is that you have to say that there is only one truth. There is only absolute truth, and there is only one. Everything else is a statement in which cannot exist. Because even if you say, well, there is multiple, then why is that one true?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that one point true? And he's just like, well, you can't. You have to like argue why that. It just becomes such a nightmare in actual logical thinking. But beyond all those things, um, there just comes a point where you can't like I could not fix all my stuff. And no matter
Mm-hmm.
how much I hide and how much I tried, and no matter how much I put myself into anything, I never felt anything more. I kept trying to strive for pleasure, if you will. If I was going to hell in Dante's Inferno land, I would have been in the first, I'd been in rings 2 through 4, right? The
Mm-hmm.
pursuit of just pleasure, right? And it's just like I couldn't figure those things out, and it's just because I knew that there was more. I could just feel it deep down inside of me. I knew I wanted something more. I just didn't know what that more was. And so that was always been just a driving factor in
Mm-hmm.
me. And I've always thought of it like it's like a an echo of Eden, that there is this existence in my soul that this world should be perfect and it should be good, but it's not. And I just
This
my
is one of
perception
the
or desire.
arguments. Yeah, this is one of the arguments that C.S. Lewis would use, that the fact that you long for it itself is an argument. I'm very careful with the usage of the word proof,
Yeah.
so I'm not going to use it now. But I think the argument that he uses is that that desire in itself is a pointer, is a indication to the existence of God, because like you cannot be hungry if there is no food. You're only hungry because there is food, right? If food did not exist, you would not feel the need to consume food.
You mean
So that
the other way
desire,
around? If you had no faculties to consume food, you'd have no desire to eat food.
well, either no faculties to consume food. Food is just used to be a chicken, right? So chickens clearly
Yeah.
exist, or cows, etc. So they become food the moment you consume them. right? And but you long for it. If you don't consume it, you long for it. You desire your body, your whole body misses it and claims for it, clamors for it. Uh, but and but just so the fact that you're feeling, if you wake up today, I mean, I think this is the core of the argument. If you wake up today, tabula rasa, blank slate, nothing about the universe, you never had food ever because you just woke up from this coma, or but you start feeling hunger, even though you haven't seen food in front of you. The hunger itself is an indication that food exists. Because why would you be
Yeah.
longing for it otherwise, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's something inside of you that's pushing you, and that you can say argue that as purely biological, and therefore everything we're saying is just like a purely biological thing. Um, I'm not really
Mm-hmm.
into that whole concept, generally speaking, just because I recognized this when I was pretty young. Because whenever I'd get hurt,
Mm-hmm.
I'd get really sad, and whenever I got really sad, like I just hurt. And I noticed that, like, I could tell right away that there's something more to life than just simply just physical driving. Like, how I feel or influences, like, my physical experience by a
Mm-hmm.
huge amount. And so there's this, like, kind of this weird driving, interesting problem that I was dealing with that I couldn't figure out.
But being the devil's advocate, and like what people like me would have said back then is essentially like, hey, look, but your feelings are also biological to some extent because they're products of your brain, and right. So yet, of course, those things interact. It is just hardware and software, and yada yada yada. But it all running on your biological computer. So it's all there is. Uh, how do you view that?
I usually view that as just like a fairly hubris take, in the sense that
Mm-hmm.
you think you have the universe figured out. We
All of
just
it
we
at
just we just
15.
we have none of it figured out. I
Yeah.
mean, the fact that I can get a blood transfusion and have and acquire the new desire to eat mushrooms is a very unique world. Well, our ability to understand the world is vastly smaller than what we actually have. And like we truly don't understand how things work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just am not under this idea that, oh, it's just your driving function. It's just like, I understand the shallow claim of that. And it makes perfect
Mm-hmm.
sense on paper.
Because even
Uh,
the example that you gave, I mean, the fact that you get a blood transfusion, which is a physical thing
yeah.
that gets inserted in your bloodstream, and that changes desires that you have, would indicate that those desires are physical.
It has some indication into that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it also has just something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
As God once said, the life is in the blood,
Mm-hmm.
and there's something weird about that whole experience, that we are more than just simply a physical matter, is how I look at it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm not quite sure that I just simply don't know, and I don't try to pretend like I know. I just don't. I just have this inkling that the world is not simply materialist, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
like really great with words. Uh, and I don't try to be really great with these arguments, because I don't think you can ever defeat, like, you never convince somebody that God does or does not exist by arguing over whether or not emotions come from the physical world, or if there's something more to it. I just don't think you're going to ever win that argument, because I just
You,
don't
you,
think
you
it.
you really you really think so? I actually disagree with that. I disagree
Yeah.
with that based on my own experience, and I just think that people are not patient enough.
I think that
Uh,
I'm pretty sure if
because
you
then
reviewed your emotions,
you don't convince them at that moment. So you mean you have the argument, and then the person remains unconvinced. But the reason I think it's important to have the argument, and otherwise I wouldn't be here, to be quite honest. I mean, doing this podcast, but you have this argument, and at that moment it doesn't convince you, but later on it does, and maybe you wouldn't have arrived where you did if it wasn't for the fact that you had that argument to begin with.
yeah, yeah, I mean, you could be right. People get convinced for
Yeah.
different reasons, and
Yeah.
I can't speak to all of them, but I find it a fairly uncompelling argument, in the sense that, okay, sure, all my emotions come from the physical world. What does that change? Does that why
Mm-hmm.
why why do I experience these things then? Who put that in motion?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, you can't answer any real life's questions of why am I here? Who put things in motion? Why are they in motion? Why do I care? Why do I yearn for something that's perfect? Why would I
Mm-hmm.
ever even think about something that's perfect? Why do I think if I was just a basic amalgamation of cells that gained memory and all this, and during my scared infancy of humanity, we looked at the dark forest and saw lightning and large creatures that are going to eat you, And not only did we attribute that to a god, we then attributed it to a good god. Like that is just like such an
Mhm.
outstanding intellectual leap that it just feels virtually impossible for me to believe that anyone could logically argue that because it doesn't make any sense. It makes zero sense. It's a very anti-logical jump
Mhm.
because you should not attribute horrible bad things to a supremely good source. Like it just that no one does
Yeah.
that. No one does
In
that at any
fact,
point.
yeah. In
It's a
fact,
very
this
large
is still
argument.
the reason. Still, the reason a lot of people leave religion, right? Because they have a
Yeah,
logical problem. If the so-called problem of evil. I was talking to Lane about that the other day, right?
yeah. The problem of evil. It's a classic. It's a conundrum.
Yeah.
It's actually the thing that drove me
It's
more
very
towards
illogical. Yeah.
it drove me towards believing as opposed to driving me away. Because I just
Why is
saw
that?
just because I saw like how like the decisions I was making, like everything that I was doing was really this great service to myself and at great expense to other people. Great expense at
Hmm.
my observation of other people. That I was willing to even destroy myself just to make myself feel better. Like everything was very anti-life.
Hmm. Look, I was telling Lane about it the other day, but at the late stages of my mental change, so to speak, I came to this realization that the problem of evil was also something that was getting me closer to the existence of God and not further. And the reason for that is that, again, coming from this atheist background, I didn't believe in anything supernatural. Anything had to have a physical explanation. And the funny thing about that is that sometimes you don't know what the explanation is, and then you just say, "Yeah, but there is one. I'm sure there is one. How am I sure? I'm sure because
Yeah.
I am."
It's the
And
science of the gaps.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
equally it's equally as conundrum as God of the
yeah,
gaps.
exactly. And we'll figure it out. Well, one day we're not there yet. We
Yeah.
don't know, but we'll figure it out. How do I know that? I know because I believe at the end of the day, right? But I so in this worldview in which nothing supernatural can possibly exist, uh, I came to realize that I could explain the good things in the world to evolution. Like we evolved in this, we evolved in this environment, so we evolved to seek those things, so we see them as good, and etc. So the fact that the world is good sometimes for me did not have any logical problems. It's just a sure. I mean, I can see how how evolution took us there, but I just couldn't fathom the amount of evil in the world. That it didn't sound random. I mean, it sounded to me like, yeah, someone is doing this to us, right? In some sense, and obviously that isn't God. If you believe in the Christian worldview, that's the other guy. But at least it helped me broke out of this fully physical way of seeing the world.
Yeah. Well, I think the hard part is if we do view the world as fully physical, this is where things all
Yeah.
break down. This is like where like the classic person that's like the world is only physical. The pure materialist or reductionist, or whatever one you want to insert here, point of view is that then by the very logic, you also have to celebrate Coney, the child soldier lord, because he is
Hmm.
most certainly taking advantage of all evolutionary processes, all the physical world to be able to get everything. Like like it is the pinnacle of the purely physical manifestation.
Hmm.
And that's that. I mean, that is the reality is that if you just think we're driven by biological processes, if you think everything is just a reduction from some social aspect that we've learned, then someone killing someone for somebody else's goods is not a bad thing. It's just not,
Hmm.
but it is.
Yeah.
You know it
It
is,
can
but
be it
it's
can
not.
be
It's not
against
a bad thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like you have
it
to
can be
accept the fact
relatively bad, right? You can say it's relatively bad. I
for
mean,
the person getting
society.
killed, it's bad.
No, yeah. No, but you can make the argument. You can make the argument that, look, we have societal rules, and within society, we shun those things, and we don't want those things to happen because, and that provides you an advantage. But you cannot say that this is absolutely bad, right?
Yeah, you
Just
can just say it's bad for
yeah.
quote unquote society, but then there's been
So
plenty of
yeah,
societies
exactly.
that have operated
Yeah.
purely a lot different than we have, and
Hmm.
they have allowed a lot more violence between people, and they still were large societies, very, very large societies, and
And
very successful societies.
successful, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, the Assyrians were not known for being kind and gentle.
Yeah.
They were
And
brutal. And so and
I
there you
yeah.
go. And so it's like, okay, well, maybe you can be successful in many kinds of societies. So why did
I
we
always
land on this one being the
imagine,
good
yeah.
one?
I always imagine people welcoming Gengis Khan with a protest.
Yeah.
right? And it's just a completely different. And he worked for them, and in that society, in that society, everybody's humans. We all share things that are biological. Again, this is not to say that nothing is biological. Some things are biological, and some of those drives at least go through our biology. But Genghis Khan probably had a very different view of the world than we do, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at one point, either it was his wife or one of his many concubines came in, and to just test as many as just like shoot her. And so they turned and they shot her dead full of arrows. And like that was
Hmm.
just perfectly fine. That was just how life
Hmm.
works. If you've watched the latest Dune, that
I
kind of
did, yeah.
brutality reminds me of Fade Ralpha, right? He would just like
Hmm.
just destroy everything, kill people around him. He celebrated in death, right? Like there's people like that, and the hard part again when it comes down to purely materialist arguing is that it's extremely hard to actually make a case for why that's wrong. But we all
Hmm.
100% know it's wrong.
Yeah.
I'm just not buying I'm just not buying the evolutionary thing because it just doesn't make any sense because it appears nowhere else. It doesn't even come
None of
close to
those,
appearing.
yeah.
It barely even appears in ourselves. It's an
Yeah.
active fight you have to put up to not do those things. I mean, that's why,
Hmm.
people always make fun of, you see all these really dumb, really, really dumb things on the internet saying like an eye for an eye makes the whole world
Hmm.
blind. And it's just like, hey, you only say that because you live in that modern world. You
Yes.
don't
Not in
know
Genghis
what the
Khan's
past
world, right?
yeah, you don't know what the past world was like. The past world was, "Oh, you hit my wife, I'm gonna go murder you and your entire family." Right? You've dishonored me, like, everybody dies, and then, the law comes down and says, "Okay, hold on. If they knock out one of your eyes, you can knock out one of their eyes. You cannot exceed that bounds." Also, that puts, like, a huge funnel on a reduction of violence and just intensity and all the things that go wrong, and it's because they don't have there is no perception of a world that could exist, but that world was the normal world for a long time of just
Hmm.
utter brutality.
Look,
Now we don't live
none
in
of
that.
those arguments, yeah, none of those logical arguments for whether or not there is a God ever convince me uh, at all. Today I accepted, but I had to accept something else first. But they seem to convince you from the start. But what some people would say is that fine, okay, I accept this argument. Like one of the arguments that a lot of people tend to accept is the prime mover. Like, okay, sure, there is a prime mover, so there is
Yeah.
some deistic Spinoza kind of God that put the universe in motion. But how do you go from that in your experience and in your life to hold on? It not only there is a God, but as it so happened, he 2,000 years ago, give or take, he came to earth on the flesh. His name was Jesus, later called Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and he died for us. And you believe that. And how do you go from one to the other?
For me, mine was more experiential, right?
Yeah.
I never had shame. I never had any sort of interaction, right? So if there was a God and I had direct interaction, then that would have changed my perception of it all. So until
Hmm.
that moment happened, it was just like man in the clouds, right? I had a very Looney
Yeah.
Tunes grasp of what. Oh, sure, yeah, there's a cloud somewhere with an angel, and so for me, nothing changed until that moment. And so for me, it's kind of like the inverse, which is that I now had a very direct experience. Why? Why did my heart get so violently changed? And the worst part of all, changed very, very much against what I want
Hmm.
because I did
But
not
but how
want
do you
it.
know? How do you know that this was not someone else?
That I had just those couple of experiences, right? Because at
Yeah.
that point, I was just like, "Is this actually real? Am I just making this up? Is this some
Yeah.
sort of, set of things?" At one point, I finally was just like, "That's it." Like I just don't know if I think I've deluded myself, and there's absolutely no way this is real. It's just not. I've convinced myself of something that does not exist, right? Because
Hmm.
again, the logic is always
It
the
could
hard
be.
part, which is
Yeah.
yeah. And so I was like, I've convinced myself, and I was in a very unusual place, a place I normally am never at. I was in a room, I was far away from any last person and all that. And then right when I thought that, I still remember that there's this man named Austin. He just walks in. He's just like, "Hey, I had this really strong feeling like God was telling me I'm supposed to come and talk to you. Like right then and at that moment, I was just like, dang, I'm even getting checkmated in my checkmating, right? Like I just couldn't
Yeah.
escape from this. And this happened more than once where I was just like, dang it. Why is this happening? This is so stupid, right? Because like I didn't want it to be real.
Hmm.
I had no desire for it, if you will. I had supreme desire for it in the sense that I wanted to live a life that actually was good. But I did not want to live a life that I was responsible for any of my actions, if you
Hmm.
will.
But I don't get it. Like how any of that brings you closer to the Christian God specifically? Is it really just because you grew up in that culture, or
Because I specifically, well, that's because I prayed and asked for him. I said,
okay?
"Show me, prove."
Hmm.
That doesn't always work, right? I would not
Yeah.
recommend the prove it approach, but for whatever
Hmm.
reason, I got proved. I got served, and so that's the strong solidifier. Obviously, I started there, but then I took classes and started thinking about other religious type stuff, and I just tried to understand it all. And I kind of came to the same conclusion, which is all world religions are the same, except one.
Except one.
Except one. Everything is
Remember,
always
yeah.
everything is you reach for it, meaning like you got to do all these things and then you cross some sort of line and then it is good. But if you don't reach for all those things, then it is bad. Whereas on the other
Hmm.
side, on the Christian side, is it is bad. And if you say I can't do it, then you win. Which is just like it's like the polar opposite of all other ones. And I was like, this is exceptionally unusual. The the perfect mirror that they are of each other, right? Like
Hmm.
they're not the same. They're like perfectly inverted of each other, and there's only one on the perfect inversion side, which just seems kind of bizarre to me. And so there's
Yes,
like little
and yeah.
factoids along the way that helped, solidify these little things. And then, there's you could do the whole thing with like the manuscripts and the historicity and all, there's like 10,000 other things that also go along with it. But those are all I find them very boring in the weeds. And when you are questioning things, it's a great read. But if you
Hmm.
just absolutely don't believe it, then it doesn't really matter. Like I don't think a lot of people are like, "Oh, well, actually, I was not believing, but then I learned that there was 25,000 manuscripts in 5 different languages," and I'm like, "Well, then Jesus must be real." Like, no, I'm just not sure if those are like a good
Well, it
a
happened
good
to me.
place.
It happened to
Are
me.
the-
This is what happened to me. This is pretty much what happened to me.
You got hit with
And
the manuscript count, and you were
I
just like,
did.
"Dang it." You're
Well,
telling me
it's
that
funny.
the Odyssey had like 1400 years
Yeah,
later, and then you're just like,
yeah,
"Dang
yeah.
it."
Well, not to the specifics, but just and in fact, I have a very different experience than I guess a lot of people in that sense, and I'm still coming to terms as to why. And the best answer I could find so far, which could be right or wrong, I have no idea, right? Just as you know, like sometimes we're just winging it.
Yeah.
Is that like maybe God wants me to share those experiences to show other people who are very rationally stubborn as I was, that like look, if you can get to this through sheer rationality, which is again what happened to me. I'm not a very experiential person, and sometimes I pray to God these days, say, hey, I already accept you, and through rationality, I've done the work, I've done the job, of like showing people. Can I have the experience now, please? Because I'm not a very experiential person in general. I don't feel much. I'm hyper rational, but still for me is very, and going back to your point about convincing stuff. One of the things that I shared in this podcast before, but like just doing it again. I had an experience with a person, again, not an encounter with a person around 2014, or around 10 years ago, in which I was having this atheist conversation, and this that was a room with a Catholic person and a Christian Orthodox person, Eastern Orthodox, and they were trying to convince me that God is real and I should be a Christian. And I told them, look, I this is all nonsense. This is not none of that is provable. All of that is woo woo, and religions are not falsifiable. It are just claims that you make. And the thing is that even the claims that you made now, to some extent, are non-falsifiable, because you can never say that it was Jesus or it was not Jesus, or do you feel this or
Yeah.
you don't feel that. Uh, so different people come through different paths, and to my surprise, this person, the Orthodox one, agreed with me and said, "You're right. religions are non-falsifiable. It's not something that you can falsify. You will never know. Just it's just people except one. There is one religion that is falsifiable, and that is Christianity. And then I called bollocks. I said that's nonsense. And what he said is that look, if you read the letter to the Romans, Saint Paul is saying that we're here. Again, I'm terrible at quoting things verbatim, but he's saying we're here because Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And if that did not happen, we're all wasting our times. We're the
Yeah.
biggest fools in the universe. So you cannot falsify the claims of any of those religions. You can't know that this thing really is a religious thing or not, and you can't claim, you can't prove or even have any evidence that the world had a creator or didn't have a creator. But you can look at history. You can look at history and understand that this event is falsifiable. Either this man rose from the dead or he didn't. And the way I came to faith was through understanding, through looking at history. And the reason I looked at history late, because at the moment, when he said, if Jesus didn't rose from the dead, we're all fools, my response was, yeah, you're all fools.
Yeah.
So he didn't convince me at the moment, but later on, like 10 years later, that became a fundamental part of my worldview. And when I was looking coincidentally at history for other reasons, part of the reason because I love the Roman Empire and I was trying to understand how some of those things happen, I understood that look, just this happened, this thing happened, and you can falsify it. I'm not going to claim that anybody who looks into it is going to be convinced, but there is plenty of evidence to show that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And if he
Yes.
did, then you have to reevaluate a lot of things about what you think about the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been through those. Those are
Yeah.
they're rather shocking. There's decent.
What's it?
At least there's a very decent amount of It's a very it's quite the conundrum once you get into it. And I think
Hmm.
the most absurd theory, the anti theory, would be the
Yeah.
swoon theory, which still gets trotted out every now and then. That
What's
Jesus
that? What's
got
that?
he got stabbed by the Romans, got crucified, all that kind of stuff. But then when they wrapped him up in cloth and everything, he swooned in that cloth for those 3 days, and he actually came back. He didn't actually die. He
Oh, okay.
he was healed enough that he could leave and then say he didn't die.
I heard that one. Yeah, I heard
Yeah,
that.
yeah. For me,
That.
that's the least plausible uh, counter argument, because that suggests that there's a bunch of people who their term for resurrection, which we use today, literally mean upright dead, dead man walking,
Hmm.
right? Like they did not
Hmm.
believe in dead people walking. It was very
Hmm.
unusual for that. Like that was a very anti-Roman, anti-Jewish type thought. And
Hmm.
so when he came back, if he was just like crawling, because remember he had nails driven through the feet, he would not be walking. It would not be looking good. And he was just absolutely just battered and could barely breathe and barely move. And maybe he's not going to make it. I don't think anyone's going to
Yeah.
be like, oh, that's God. Right?
Yeah.
This is just such a stupid
No,
argument.
precisely because the whole argument was like he came back and commanded respect, right? If it was just 3 days later after crucifixion, even if you survived, you would not be in any position to command that level of respect, right? You're clearly just beaten up.
Yeah. You clearly
My
somehow
favorite.
did not get killed. I mean, that's the reason why they broke the femur, was that people
Hmm.
did actually not die from crucifixion. And so
Hmm.
typically what they would do is they'd stab you in the chest. And if you made any sort of movement, they would then break your femur to ensure you couldn't run away by accident when nightfall came and somehow night you got
Hmm.
away. Like, because it did
Hmm.
happen. Like people got away,
Hmm.
but they did not, in fact, break his femur, because they're like, this guy is really dead. Like, not kind of
Hmm.
dead. He's like really, really dead. And the Romans,
Hmm.
they were a lot of things. And one of those things was really great at killing people. I mean,
Yeah.
they were absolutely fantastic at it.
We were talking about Genghis Khan. We could have used the Romans as an example, right? And all the
Yeah,
things that
no.
they did to Carthage. And it wasn't that Cato that he would end every discourse that he had by saying Carthago delenda est, which means Carthage must be destroyed. He would go in front of the Senate talking about the price of grain, and he would make this speech about why grain should be cheaper and what we should do to. Oh, and by the way, Carthago delenda est. That's how he would finish, and eventually he got his wish. So you're right. I mean, they were truly my favorite one is the alien one. That Jesus was just an alien, so that's why he had all of those.
Alien of the Gaps.
Alien.
That one's also feels really, it
Yeah,
just
yeah,
feels it's
yeah.
just it's such a it's somehow more of a stretch. Like, just the
No,
actual
but that's why it's my
logical
favorite
conundrum
because
that
like yeah,
exists.
yeah,
Yeah, because not only were they an alien, that means they would have foreign bacteria on them, and, like, just imagine
uh
what it would be like. Because we can reach not too far in American history and Canadian history and remember the plight that was put upon the Native Americans just
hmm
by simply having different biology.
yeah.
Yeah, immunities. And so they're like, just imagine what alien immunity and alien bacteria looks like. If an alien walked on this earth, we would all die and they would die probably from us as well.
hmm
Or they
Isn't
would do
isn't
some
that
sort
the
of
plot of that book from Julius? Is it Julius Verne that wrote like the Martian invasion? As I age, I'm getting terrible. Like, I'm remembering names of things.
oh,
So what is the
I've never
name?
been
What
there.
is the name of the book? You read
I
that
don't know
book
that one.
about the yeah.
No,
So
but it
in
sounds very
fact,
plausible. We'd all die from
yeah,
just diseases of each other.
the aliens were defeated essentially by bacteria, and
That's
the
also
reason
stupid.
the reason this book was famous because somebody decided to read the book aloud on the radio in the 1930s, and then people thought it was real, and they were reporting an actual invasion. So that became quite famous because of that. But like in the end, and I think if I'm not mistaken, this is Julius Verne. But at the end of the book, the aliens die from bacteria.
Yeah, I've always
Yeah,
hated those because the reality is
yeah,
like, let's just pretend. I know we're way off topic, but we're gonna do it anyways.
yeah,
Let's
yeah.
pretend an alien invasion did happen. The
hmm
aliens get here, they fly across. Even if you just go with what's the book called? The three body problem. They're jumping from
hmm
just the nearest star, 4 light years away. They're able to do light year travel
hmm
and all that kind of stuff. If they actually make it here, they'd be so vastly superior in technology. They would just simply like press a button, or maybe they had touch screens at that point. They'd wave their hand,
Yeah.
and then we would just all fall dead on the planet. Like,
hmm
it just
Pretty
wouldn't even be
much.
it just wouldn't even be a thing. We'd just all be like,
Yeah.
we died.
Yeah.
Dang,
No,
we're
but
dead.
look, I the thing I eventually realized, something inside me had to change because if I had looked, it's not just the manuscripts, right? But if I had looked at all of those things, which when I decided to study it again, which was around the time I came out of atheism, 70% of the things I saw, I knew them before. I just saw them with a new light because
Yeah.
I had, I think, a different. I won't call it a bias, but some things have changed in the way I saw the world, and it's funny to understand what are those things and why. But the other 30% was brand new, right? And things I had no idea about. But even the things I knew about, I could always find an explanation. I could always find an explanation, a rational explanation for this thing having happened. What it became increasingly hard for me to do was to find an explanation for the collection of those things happening, right? So just that when you put all of those things about Jesus together, right? Because look, yeah, for example, like just you so he was an alien or whatever. That does not explain the stuff that happened later, which is
Yeah.
it explained this, but it does not explain the stuff that happened later. So you can find convincing arguments for convincing counterpoints to each of those arguments, but it became to me increasingly hard to find a compelling story that would explain all of them, except that this event really happened, and like this stuff that those people are talking about is real.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. As I looked into things, it was more of a, "Oh, no." Like, it is very the totality of it is very difficult,
hmm
especially the whole
Did you have
500
any?
people, and,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, it's very easy to see one person, you always see, like, a group of people believing in something until one of them dies, and then that group quickly falls apart. And they
yep.
don't, I mean, they even like the funny part is that even in what is it, Acts, that they're doing a quotation from one of the Jewish leaders, and the Jewish leaders is like, or maybe this was in not Acts, but they're like, if we just kill Jesus, then just like all the other, just like all the other people that have rose up to claim to be something, once they die, their following effectively falls apart. It'll be easy.
hmm
That's how we will know, is what they said. And then they,
hmm
then they successfully carried out their mission, and then it did the opposite. I do like that part. That's always just kind of like a fun. a fun
Is
irony to
is
life.
there yeah? Is there any one of those arguments that you like the most, and you think like, hey, this is really good. I mean, this is, if I could choose like the one thing to talk about that to prove that this event really happened, that would be the one.
The dying thing. I
Yeah.
just find it largely implausible for 12 people to have seen some dude get killed, and
Hmm.
then for them to continue on, even and say they're in their misery and upsetness that he died and he wasn't supposed to die, and then they go on and they go, no, he's really alive, right? They convince themselves, they have delusions, right? And then one of them dies, and then there's still 11 of them, or at that point, I guess there'd technically be only 10 of them, and then they still keep on going. And then another one
Hmm.
dies, and then they keep on going, and then another one dies, and then they keep on going, and then another one dies, and then they keep on going, saying, "No, it's actually real. Trust us, bro." Like it becomes so implausible from just a human argument that
Yeah,
that
and
just
they
does.
they didn't die. They didn't die from the flu.
They didn't die from the flu. One of them got. I mean,
Yeah.
the last one, the one that didn't die, got
Yeah.
boiled alive, and then when the Romans could not boil him to death, which is a very. Can we just all just imagine how horrific like that experience had to be boiled long enough that even the Romans were so freaked out that they just exiled you.
Hmm.
Like that's a bizarre. That's just in the story itself is just bizarre. And these are not just documented in one place. They're actually documented in several places, which
Yeah.
is wild. The boiling of a man who would not die.
Uh, I still believe that a lot of the things, like what I came to believe, because people will point out uh, inconsistencies in the testimonies and etc. And obviously, like those are people telling the story, and some people may exaggerate some things, and some people had a different perspective, and some people saw things differently, and etc. Um, I There is one thing that really threw me off guard when I found out. And so, I mean, I was expecting part of the testimony to be not true. In the same way that if you read something in the newspapers today, some parts are not true. Just because people understand things differently and they see things differently, and all of that. The one thing I actually thought, okay, the core of the story is true. So they're just reporting and they're exaggerating, but this guy died, came back from the dead. But like this thing with the sun being blocked, no way this happened. Because this is completely out there. I think people just embellish the story.
Hmm.
And I was very surprised, and this is one of the things that threw me completely off guard. I was very surprised to find out that this is actually documented.
Yeah, it's documented by two separate writers of the Roman
Yes,
age. Yeah,
two
two different
and
writers and two
and
different publications, if you will.
Thalus and the name of the other guy was actually reading about this. What was his name? Phlegon. So Phlegon and Thalus were two historians. And the thing about one of the things that people don't realize sometimes is that 1% is estimated that 1% of ancient literature survive, just because it's very hard to keep those things alive. So we actually don't have the works of those two guys, like the manuscripts of them describing this do not exist. We know about them from books that survived from Christian sources, but the author is not what So it's essentially like I'm quoting this guy, and I'm saying person X in book Y said this, and this is how we know that book X, book Y, person X existed. But the thing is that this was Julius Africanus, a Christian. I don't know what exactly he was, but if a historian, monk, priest, or something like that, he is writing to contest what those guys said. So he's writing in denial, which is how like it's not that he's saying, you see, like those guys wrote that, this is proof that this actually existed, because that would be very biased. He's actually saying, yeah, this thing that those guys wrote is nonsense. So he's contrarian to those guys because they attributed that to physical explanations. Right? So he's not using that as supporting his evidence. He's using that to say, they described that and they said it was a solar eclipse. But it could not have been a solar eclipse for reasons A, B, C. And then he starts listing the reasons why this could not have been a solar eclipse. Right. And
Yeah.
so like this was mind blowing, because like any historian for any other thing would say, okay, this is evidence that this event really happened, because you had this other source quoting the original source in a negative way, right? They cover in a negative way, and you can still learn from this that, as unbelievable as it seemed, the sun went away, and it was not a solar eclipse, because we had a solar eclipse the other day in North America. That stuff lasts 2 minutes,
Yeah.
and this lasted 3 hours, documented.
Yeah. Yeah. There's multiple people that write about the craziness and the earth shaking and various other type of writings that existed. It's pretty wild to read about those things.
Yeah, we have a comment here from X to add and saying miracles are real. I have absolutely no doubt. And Dev is late again. Language Dev.
Yeah. Shit. Why would
But
you say that?
yeah.
You've already dropped a few F bombs on this podcast
uh,
as it is. So
I try to avoid it, but and sometimes they're just natural. They're just natural.
they're just naturally occurring. They're,
Yeah.
they're, they're free form. They're free form
Yeah.
Fs.
Dalton said earlier as well that the eye for an eye, the thing they were talking about, happened not much time ago. Actually, even maybe 2 or 3 generations. I'll
Yeah.
go further than that. It still happens today. I mean, it's still the default mode of, I think, of human.
But yeah, there's plenty of
interactions.
countries that don't operate under a more overarching civil authority.
I mean, I think the core of this is that within us, we still have this desire. Your first response is the eye for an eye.
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, you can most certainly see you can most certainly see it in your own heart in the sense that you can see it at least displayed in manifold outpourings out on the internet, on Twitter. People will just absolutely just shred each other on the internet. I mean, that's really what people are. And I fully believe that that's like the true humanity coming out. That's not because we are all nice and buttoned up and everything's nice and good because we have all these consequences and all that. But if these rules relaxed, this is what would happen in real life.
Do you think Twitter is more like Jesus Christ or more like Genghis Khan?
I don't think that's a hard question to answer. It's more like Jengus.
Just
Just because I mean the thing
and
is that there would be a significantly larger amount of violence if there was just less rules, right? Like that's all it would take.
one of the things that I first of all want to make something clear for my audience. We have 3,000 people watching us live right now. Again, this comes from multiple sources. I don't know if they're concurrent viewers. Probably not, because Elon does like
Not
to.
on Twitter. Yeah, not on
Yeah,
Twitter. I don't know. I don't know what that number
yeah,
means.
yeah. But not concurrent viewers, but it is the best number we've seen so far. And I do want to clarify for the audience, anybody who is listening, that I would love to have people over that follow other religions. I think there is a commonality of the religious experience. There is not only Christian. I am Catholic more specifically because of the things I've seen, and because of the conclusions I reached. But I would love to have people over that disagree with that and disagree respectfully in a non-Twitter way. But
Yeah, no Twitter raise.
one of the things that I also came to conclude was that, as an atheist, we love to attribute the bad things in the world to religion. So religious wars and religious this and religious that, and this is proof that that this is all nonsense. And religion, coming from the Richard Dawkins background, if there was, or even John Lennon, if there was no religion, imagine a world without religion, we would all be living in peace. So a lot of people, including myself back then, I mean, we come from this understanding that this is a driving force for evil, because then you get people fighting for those things that are not provable anyway. Twitter kind of helped me realize that this is not factual, because imagine the Git versus learn Git versus don't learn Git folks with access to state level weaponry,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
You would
you
fight.
don't actually have to imagine any of these things. I mean, you can just take a brief look around the 20th century,
Hmm.
and there's been plenty of. I mean, China is a great example of a good atheistic regime. Like, what does it look like with atheism? I mean, they only wiped out what 100 million people.
Hmm.
Mao just absolutely plowed people down like it was nobody's business. In the 80s, they used to lift up
Hmm.
anyone of the religious faith on cranes and drop them until they died in a very public way to help remind people that they're very anti against all that. Imagine
Yeah.
tailwind haters with the tank. It's real talk. I mean, it would be bad. But I mean, like,
Yeah.
you just absolutely don't need what the real takeaway is that I mean it's the same thing with like there's a sexual infidelity in the Catholic Church. There has been
Oh, absolutely.
molestations of children
Absolutely.
that are absolutely horrible, and we can all agree and we all look at that. And there's a reason why that hurts a lot is because the expectation of them is much higher. But there was a
Hmm.
study, again, studies, take it lightly, a data analysis that showed that kids were sexually abused at a 100x rate in public school with teachers comparatively to the Catholic Church, but
Hmm.
nobody's upset about that. I think the general perception is that if you claim to be of a religion of peace and you do not act peaceful, then it's somehow just extraordinarily worse than it is if you don't claim those things and you misbehave. Somehow you do not fall under the same hate guise as the other way around. And I actually agree with it because you aren't living because you've made an absolute claim like there is a moral reasoning and then you fail
Hmm.
on this moral reasoning, it's somehow much worse than if you say, I don't think there's any reason to do something and I think I can do whatever I want. And this is why Richard Stallman still walks around, despite the fact that he said horrible things on the internet, including that it's okay for young kids to have sex with adults. Right? Like that's absolutely atrocious. Yet there's a man out there that's a part of that, right? It's because he
Hmm.
does not make the same moral claims, I think, and that somehow flies under the radar much less than say the Catholic Church. And so
Oh,
that's how I look at the
Richard,
world is that
Richard,
it all
Richard
exists.
Stallman.
Everyone is
Yeah.
evil.
Yeah, Richard Stallman makes a lot of moral claims, and
He
the
makes
thing
a
is that
lot of
he would include that in his moral guidance. But
yeah.
his whole worldview is informed by like this is the moral thing to do. Like the whole idea of free software, the beef that he always had with the people claiming the term open source is that open source is not a moral claim; it is a practical claim, and we have to approach this from a moral perspective, right? That closing the source is wrong, but somehow in his moral worldview there is space for that. So you
Yeah. But I mean, to make that drive the point home is that even in institutions in which people claim a bunch of these things, even where we have the
know.
Saint Augustine's rules of engagement, where like you cannot do
Hmm.
more harm than harm is done. Like there's like all these type of rules that you can go through and go through everything that he's claimed that we should behave as. They're still great evil. And
Hmm.
to me, that doesn't somehow make it that if there was no religion, there would be no problems. What that says to me is
Hmm.
that people can't live up to being good. Like that's just not a fundamentally achievable position among humans. Now, there may be somebody that, given the fact that they've never really been challenged, they can view themselves as pretty good because they've never really had a moral bar to live up to. Sure, fine. I'm not going to argue against you, but put yourself up against a moral bar.
Yeah.
You know, here's a great example. Say no to that extra cookie. Just watch anybody fail at that one,
Oh,
right? Like it's
my addiction that I mentioned that I cannot get rid of is food.
yeah. Watch
And
somebody
again,
just take some
yep.
very trivial addiction and be like, all right, just say no to it just for a second. Be the good person. Say you can do it. Just watch people just flounder.
I've heard the other day this explained in such a beautiful way, which is you're all beating on Tiger Woods because he cheated on his infidelity. But you're saying this from your living room. You're not saying this with 100 Swedish top models throwing themselves at your arms, right? So that's easy.
Yeah.
What would you do? What would you do? Like it's easy. Or as my favorite philosopher Mike Tyson always says, I mean, everybody's got a plan until you punch in the face. So when you're faced with the temptation,
Yeah.
things are very very different. And
Everyone has the moral high ground until you are faced with a real conundrum and you actually really get to measure yourself. And that's why I think again, that's why I'm not above any sort of moral failure. That's why I don't,
mhm,
you never hear me calling out, being upset at people for these kind of things because I realize just like how easy it is to fall into these things. I don't, like obviously, if you do something egregious, I think there's various things you should lose, but I'm not going to completely dunk on you because I realize just how simple it is even for me to fall into these kind of problems. But it's just like I just don't have those pressures right now. So I'm happy I don't look at porn because what happened if I had those pressures all of a sudden? Would I be up? Would I be up for the fight not to cheat on my wife in a physical way? I
Hmm.
don't know. You know, I'm not trained mind, body, and soul, but now I am. I'm training for it. So when that day comes, I can be like,
Hmm.
yeah.
No, dude, I was extremely addicted. I was extremely addicted to a game. And the thing about me is that I'm not a very eclectic person. I was never the kind of like playing video games in general. So I always ever, I mean, as a kid, as a teenager, I played a bunch of stuff, but I only ever played one game, like seriously. That was Civilization.
Yep.
But I started playing this game at age 17, Civilization 2, and I played pretty much all of them, except for a period of time when I was in university that I just didn't have the time. And I was playing Civilization 6 the other day, and unlike other things, and my wife's now saying that I got addicted to chess because I've been playing a lot of chess, but I I know the difference because like I am obsessed with chess recently because I keep playing and I want to play and then I get frustrated because I lose. But if I have to stop, I do. And with Civilization, if I had to stop, I didn't. That is the like my best chance was not starting a game because once I did, I just could not stop. I could not, by the life of me, stop. And this is addiction. And I only like there was this one day that like my boy wanted he was two, and he wanted me to give him a bath, and I was playing the damn game, and he came down crying because I didn't go up to give him a bath, a two and a half or something like that. And I felt terrible because I wanted to be with my kid and I want to be a good dad and I want to give him a bath, but I did not stop playing because I couldn't. Right? Just so that's different. And I had to. I don't play anymore, but I also don't even start. I don't even start because I know exactly that
Yeah.
part of the way in which you fight addiction is that it's really hard, and I think only with the Lord's help I was able to actually stop. Because not even my kid, I mean, I did feel terrible, but not even my kid being there asking me, Daddy, come. I could stop. I just didn't. But even though I don't start, I know that the day I play this, if I ever play this game for 5 minutes, uh, all the work that I've done in the past 3 years of not playing gone.
Yeah. And it will happen.
No,
Yeah.
it will
I
not.
there's I do various
But I mean, yeah, yeah,
I do same things in the sense that
yeah.
I avoid a lot of stuff, right? I avoid any sort of uh like, even don't like because people like there will be various photos on the internet of we wouldn't
Yeah.
call it pornography, but we'll just say that they're less dressed than they are more dressed. And so I will personally just avoid even glancing at those
Yeah.
photos because I
Mm-hmm.
know that there's a demon waiting around the corner. Like I have,
Yes.
the alcoholic shouldn't take a drink just because they
Mm-hmm.
haven't been an alcohol since they haven't drank in 10 years, right? I
Mm-hmm.
just know for a fact that like it's just right there. So I mean I understand the idea that I just have to be very protective with my vision because I don't know if it's like alcoholism. Like will one small thing destroy me like it does an alcoholic, or will it be, because I know some people that I knew an alcoholic that couldn't even have like white wine cooked into a white sauce Alfredo because like that alone would trigger it. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
just like there's people that are super sensitive to, relapsing, if you will. And so I have always been on the it's better to be hypersensitive and lose out
Yeah.
on something than it is to be
Mm-hmm.
risking and lose out on something far better.
Dev has a better example than the Tiger Woods thing we talked about. Look at that. So I'm putting the comment here. Everybody wants serverless until they get to DOS.
Yeah, that's a fact.
So that's a
But I
fact.
do like the Tiger Woods one. I really do because a lot of
Yeah.
people just simply haven't experienced. There's all
Mm-hmm.
these people that, there's a very popular phrase in or idea in today's society that people look down on people with money and they're like, oh, they're all these like bad people and all this. And it's just like, man, if you had money, do you think somehow you'd be a better person?
Yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
doubt. I'm pressing X hard right now because I do not believe it.
Yeah. And also like one of the things that I've heard from someone some 10, 15 years, actually more like 15 years ago that stuck with me was this one guy. He was very peaceful. He was very, very peaceful. And was always like the Zen guy, never like mellow and never agitated. But he was a black belt in martial arts, like a sensei, and however many dans he had, like super skilled. And he practiced yai jutsu with real katanas, which is essentially like the Japanese sword, but he practiced with real cutting swords, and he practiced the technique to actually cut things and slice things up and etc. But very peaceful guy. And then one day he was asked, "Why do you do this?" And this is a real story. I knew this guy personally, uh, and he said, "I do this to learn how to kill people." And everybody was shocked because this is this guy that is always talking about peace. And then he explained that until you learn how to kill people and until you have the power to kill people, you're not peaceful, you're just weak.
Yeah, fair.
Like you don't have the like right you don't have the right to tell yourself, I wouldn't cheat on my wife if you're ugly, poor, and nobody else is available to you. The same way that you don't have the right to say I'm peaceful if you cannot cause harm to anybody, but if you can and then you choose not to, that's virtue. So from that point of view, I think that's what he was talking about.
Yeah, it's a good one. I actually like that a
Yeah,
lot. I think at some point I'll probably end up regurgitating that story as my own.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I know
Feel
a guy
free. I
that
mean,
knows a guy.
I know a guy that knows a guy, and like just I trained martial arts for a while as well, and he was not my sensei, but I met him, and even though he did not tell me that story, that's I heard the story from one of his students. Like it was completely believable because that was the guy, right? He was super peaceful.
Yeah. Well, I like you.
Awesome, man. It was a pleasure having you today. I had a blast. I hope you too. Dalton sitting here, nice point of view. Um, Look, come back anytime. It was a pleasure
Yeah.
talking to you.
Sorry that my story isn't as thoughtful as you might hope it to be.
Uh,
I kind of went
of
in
course it
a
was.
reverse direction and then searched out for information as opposed to search out for information. I had a little bit more of
Everybody,
on the using side of things, on the addiction side of things that was the primary driver.
everybody. Look, I've heard from a lot of the viewers that they appreciate how non-directed those stories are. You know, we were preparing to turn off, but now I have to tell you that story. All of this idea of a podcast started when I went on your stream, and then the audience started calling me Joe Rogan. And then I figured, look, maybe I should have a podcast, and that's why I wanted to be long. I explicitly am not Joe Rogan, but I wanted to be like long form and have those deep conversations. And my first idea was to have a podcast called The Boomer Angle, where I would bring a bunch of boomers to talk about technology, and boomer angle. That was the joke.
Yeah, I
And
get it. Don't worry.
but
That's a
but
very
if you
boomer way
have
to
to,
explain it.
but if you have to explain it, it's probably like I did to some people. Like it's probably not a great joke. But I also figure, what, like I want to have those personal connections and talk about personal stuff, and that's just nicer because nobody else is doing it, right? Just and that's what Joe Rogan would do.
What would Joe Rogan do?
What would Joe
That's what
Rogan do?
WWJD stands for. It's Joe, right?
There you go. There you go. Awesome. Prime, thanks for coming, man.
Yeah,
See you
thanks
next
for
time.
having me. I appreciate that.